I first heard the guitar on a night when sleep refused to choose me. The town was quiet in that lonely way that makes every sound feel louder than it should. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest and asks questions you're not ready to answer. I had my window cracked open just enough to let in the ocean air when the music slipped through, soft at first, like it was testing whether it was welcome. A single melody, slow, careful, almost unsure of itself. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It felt like the song was meant only for whoever was willing to stay awake and listen. I leaned closer to the window, not to see, because there was nothing to see yet, but to feel it better. The notes carried longing in them, not sadness exactly, something unfinished. And for reasons I didn't understand, my chest tightened as if the music had found a loose thread inside me and gently tugged. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same soft rhythm drifting through the dark. And by the third night, curiosity got the better of me. I slipped on my hoodie and followed the sound down the narrow wooden steps outside my place. The music led me to the small porch 2 houses down, washed in low yellow light. I couldn't see his face at first, only the movement of hands over strings, the gentle rise and fall of shoulders with each breath. I cleared my throat before doubt could stop me. He looked up, surprised at first, then amused. "Sorry," he said lightly. "Did I wake you?" "No," I lied. It sounded nice. For a moment, he just studied me in the dim light. Then he nodded toward the empty chair across from him. "You can sit, if you want. I play better when someone's listening." That was how I met Lucas. We didn't exchange much that first night. Just names. A few polite questions. He played. I listened. The space between us stayed careful, measured. When the song ended, the silence felt heavier than the music had been. He thanked me for keeping him company. I thanked him for the song. And then I went back home with a strange sense that something small but important had shifted. Over the next week, the porch light became a quiet invitation. I would sit across from him while he played, the night folding around us like a secret. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. I learned that he worked long hours, that he used to play on small stages but stopped. He learned that I was new in town, that I hated sleeping in silence, that I felt more at ease listening than speaking. One night, while adjusting his guitar, he said casually, "My wife works nights." The words landed softly, but they stayed with me. I nodded, unsure what I was supposed to say. He didn't speak badly of her. He didn't speak much about her at all, only that she was busy, tired, often elsewhere, and I told myself that was all it was. A fact, not a warning. Still, something about the way he held the guitar afterward felt different, like the weight of that sentence had settled into the wood. Ryan came over a few days later and noticed the late nights written all over my face. When I mentioned the music, his expression shifted. "Be careful," he warned quietly. "People who make you feel seen when you're barely known usually carry storms with them." I laughed it off, but the warning stayed. That night, Lucas played a song I hadn't heard before. The rhythm was slower than usual, almost hesitant. When he finished, he didn't reach for another chord right away. The space between us stretched, charged in a way that made me aware of my own breathing. "Do you ever feel," he asked softly, "like your life is happening somewhere you're not?" The question caught me off guard. I answered honestly. "All the time." He watched me then, really watched me. And for the first time, I felt something stir beneath the quiet. Something fragile and dangerous and unfamiliar. Not desire. Not yet. Something closer to recognition. Later, as I stood to leave, he hesitated. "Tomorrow," he said, almost uncertain, "I want to show you something. A song I haven't let anyone hear." I should have said no. I knew that even then, but I nodded instead. As I walked back through the dark, the echo of his guitar followed me like a secret promise. And somewhere between the last fading note and the silence that followed, I sensed it, the subtle shift from music into something else entirely. Something that wasn't yet a betrayal, but was already standing close enough to become one. The nights had become routine in a way that felt dangerous and irresistible. I would walk down the quiet street, hoodie pulled tight, and hear the familiar strings before I saw the light. Lucas would be waiting, guitar in hand, a half smile that didn't need words. It wasn't just the music anymore. It was him, the presence behind the chords, the subtle way he seemed to notice every shift in my expression. One night, I arrived a little earlier than usual. The porch was dim, lit by the single amber bulb that cast long shadows. Lucas looked up from tuning his guitar, and for a brief second, the world outside stopped. "You're early," he said, his voice casual, but something in the pause after those words made my heart beat a little faster. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted, and he nodded as if he understood perfectly. No questions, no judgment, just acknowledgement. He played a few gentle chords to fill the silence before speaking. "Some songs you can only play when someone's listening," he said quietly. I didn't know how to respond, so I just listened. I had begun noticing things, the way his fingers hovered over certain strings, the small hesitation before a note that carried weight, like he was choosing each sound carefully, aware that it might reach me in ways nothing else could. The music was no longer just a song. It was a conversation, intimate, fragile, and full of unspoken truths. Lucas told me more about his life that night. His voice was low, steady, almost confessional. He spoke of the exhaustion from his marriage, of long stretches of solitude, and of dreams he had abandoned in the name of responsibility. I listened, offering only nods or soft hums, letting him spill the weight he carried alone. There was a subtle tension in the air, something that made my chest tighten, but it wasn't desire yet. It was recognition, understanding, and a longing for connection I had never experienced so vividly. At one point, he paused mid-song and looked at me. "Do you ever feel like people just exist around you, but no one really sees you?" he asked. I swallowed hard, realizing that this was the very question I had been asking myself for years. "All the time," I said honestly, and he nodded as if my words made him feel less alone. Our hands brushed lightly over the guitar strings as he corrected my posture for a chord, just the tip of our fingers, but it lingered longer than expected. The warmth of his touch carried something unspoken, and I caught my breath, aware of the growing pull between us. It was electric, delicate, and frightening. He noticed my hesitation. "I shouldn't," he said, voice almost breaking. "You know I shouldn't. But sometimes it's hard not to reach for something you can't have." The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded with meaning. I knew then that the line had shifted. It wasn't just music anymore. It was emotional intimacy, a bond forming in the quiet hours when the world wasn't watching. A part of me wanted to step back, to keep my distance, to respect the boundaries, but another part of me, a quieter, braver part, wanted to stay, to listen, to be a refuge. We didn't cross that line that night. Not physically, not beyond the accidental brush of fingers, but the tension between us was undeniable. His messages lingered on my phone long after I left. "I can't stop thinking about you," one read. I stared at it, conflicted, heart pounding, guilt and exhilaration tangled together. Ryan's warning echoed in my mind as I lay awake that night. "You're falling for a married man," he had said. And yet, it didn't feel like I had a choice. I wasn't chasing him. I wasn't asking for more than what he gave. And yet, the pull was magnetic, irresistible, and terrifying. That week, our late-night sessions became almost ritualistic. Music, confessions, silences that spoke louder than words. Shadows dancing on the porch, rain tapping softly on the roof, the muted glow of streetlights painting the world in gold. Each night, the line between friend and something more blurred, and I began to understand the true danger of emotional infidelity. It wasn't about touch. It was about hearts, trust, and the vulnerability we had offered each other in the quietest hours. One night, after a particularly raw song, he looked at me and said softly, "If anyone ever knew, it would ruin everything. But I can't help what I feel when you're here." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The music had already said it all. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer just a listener. I was part of the song, and perhaps he was part of mine. And yet, danger lingered like a shadow behind the strings. We both knew this. We both ignored it, because for a few hours each night, in the quiet between chords, we were allowed to feel something forbidden, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. The rain came down harder that night, hammering against the porch roof and blurring the edges of the world. I arrived with my hoodie soaked through, shoes muddy, but I didn't care. The music was already there, soft and hesitant, like it was testing its own courage before it reached my ears. Lucas sat with his guitar, the amber light reflecting on wet strings. He looked up when I arrived, eyes catching mine for just a second, and I felt the pull between us tighten like a cord stretched too far. We didn't speak at first. The storm outside seemed louder than any words we could offer. The notes from his guitar rose and fell, trembling with emotion, echoing the weight of what had been building between us for weeks. I sat across from him, hands folded, feeling that same strange mixture of desire and guilt from before. This time, though, it was sharper, more urgent. "Ethan," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper, "I can't pretend this isn't happening anymore. I feel it every time you're here. Every song, every silence, it's you." I swallowed hard, aware of the storm both outside and inside. "I feel it too," I admitted, voice barely audible. "But I know we can't." "I know," he interrupted, shaking his head. "I know." Our hands brushed briefly as he adjusted the guitar strap, an almost accidental touch, yet enough to make my heart jump. We paused, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The storm outside roared, but inside that small porch, there was only the quiet electricity between us. He set the guitar aside and looked down at his hands, conflicted. "I can't betray her completely," he said. "I love my wife in ways that don't disappear overnight. But I can't ignore what's here either with you." The words were heavy, yet I understood. This was the cost of emotional infidelity. The invisible line we had both crossed without realizing it, the weight of feelings we weren't supposed to have, the knowledge that someone would get hurt. A brief silence followed. Then he looked at me, and for the first time, the tension between us softened into something almost tender. I wanted to close the gap, to erase the distance, but I held myself back. There was no need to speak or touch. In that moment, the music, the storm, the rain-soaked porch, everything conveyed the closeness we both craved and feared. The phone rang, sharp and insistent. Lucas's expression changed instantly. "Megan." He reached for it, face tight with guilt, and I looked away, suddenly aware of the reality we had been dancing around. "I have to answer," he said, voice heavy. I nodded silently, heart sinking. He stepped aside, spoke softly into the phone, and I could hear nothing but his expressions, apologies, explanations, promises. I stayed seated, listening to the rhythm of his words. The storm, the rain on the porch. It was enough to understand that choices had to be made, and ours had reached a turning point. He hung up and sat back down, shoulders slumped. "I can't ask you to wait. I can't promise you a future that doesn't exist." His voice was soft but resolute. "I have to try to fix what I've neglected before it's too late." I swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of relief and heartbreak. "I understand," I whispered, and I did. The bond we shared was real, powerful, and undeniable, but belonged to a fleeting moment, not a lifetime. We stood together silently for a while, the storm gradually easing. I watched the wet strings of the guitar, the amber light flickering, and realized that love wasn't always about possession. Sometimes it was about recognition, about understanding what a person meant to you, even if you couldn't keep them. Months later, I walked into a small cafe on a rainy afternoon. A familiar melody floated through the air. Lucas was there, playing for strangers, a shadow of the man I had known, yet still the same in subtle ways. Our eyes met briefly across the room. No words, no reaching out, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been. I smiled softly to myself. The pull, the tension, the music, it had all taught me something I couldn't unlearn. I had been a part of a song that wasn't mine to hold, but I would carry the echoes forever. He had pulled me closer once, in ways neither of us could fully define, and I felt the weight of love that existed only in those quiet, fragile moments. I turned toward the door, letting the cafe's warmth wash over me, and stepped back into the rain. Sometimes love doesn't come with forever. Sometimes it comes with a lesson that the most beautiful music is the one you feel, even if you can never keep it in your hands. And as I walked away, The last notes of his guitar lingered in my ears, a reminder that some connections are meant to change you, not possess you. That night, that music, that closeness, they had been everything, and that was enough.